Australia's had one huge problem for a long time: animals brought in by humans. With the first fleet, the British brought animals like rabbits to the continent, which became a disaster for agriculture and the native species that weren't prepared for these newcomers. Foxes were brought for hunting, but soon became killers of the continent's endemic wildlife. Cats have been another big cause of the decline of many Australian species. However, in the 21st century, the Australians themselves created a disaster for their land. This is Penguin Island, home to thousands of penguins, lots of birds, and other animals, and then, at some point, they brought in rats, which completely changed the look of this small patch of land. What did the Australians do on one of their islands? Today, we're going to figure it out. How do you think rats ended up on the Australian continent? Of course, true to Australia's tradition, humans brought them here. It's believed that these animals arrived with the very first and main carrier of invasive species in Australian history, the First Fleet, which arrived in 1788. Of course, no one brought rats over intentionally, but black rats aren't called ship rats for nothing. They lived on ships and easily jumped from one of the First Fleet's vessels onto the Australian continent. And that's not all, because as trade and shipping grew on top of the black rats, people also brought another species to Australia, the brown rat. What happened next? Well, the Australian continent was totally unprepared for rats, but rats are animals that can literally take over any territory that suits them. Rats are omnivores. That means if a rodent needs to eat, it won't go hunting for the right food. It sees a grain, it eats it. Sees a crop grown by humans, eats it. Food left out by humans lying around, perfect for breakfast. The rat sees a small animal, it becomes part of the diet. Literally anything can end up in a rat's stomach. Besides that, these creatures reproduce quickly. The average litter is 6 to 12 babies, and the female can have several litters a year, which means about 50 babies can be born in that time. The little rats reach sexual maturity in just 2 to 3 months, so they could also have multiple litters of 6 to 12 pups. So the rats started spreading across Australia at an incredible rate, and it was obviously no cause for celebration because these rodents are true pests, capable of destroying everything in their path. The first thing that really suffers from the rat invasion in Australia is agriculture. For example, in areas where they grow mangoes, avocados, citrus fruits, and bananas, rats eat the fruits right off the trees, leading to major crop losses. Imagine, in some cases, the damage can reach 10 to 15% of the total production, which is a huge blow for many farmers. Rodents also damage root crops like carrots and potatoes, making them impossible to sell. And this is really bad. Not just for an individual farmer, it's a problem for the country's economy. The logic is simple. Meager potato harvest means fewer potatoes on the shelves, and also less product to sell on the international market. Rats are an especially big problem for sugarcane farming in Queensland. They bite into the stalks to get to the sweet juice, which not only lowers the crop weight, but also reduces sugar levels in the stalks, seriously cutting sugarcane profits. The Queensland Department of Primary Industries estimates that when rat populations are high, sugarcane losses can be as much as 10 tons from 2.5 acres, which amounts to losing tens of thousands of dollars on each farm. Right now, Australian farmers have to spend about 3.8 billion Australian dollars a year dealing with pests, with rats being the main troublemakers. On top of that, rats are the main carriers of the leptospira bacteria in Australia. Rodents live near various water sources, and that's exactly where their urine and droppings end up, after which the spread starts in every direction possible. For example, in cows, the disease can emerge as a so-called abortion outbreak, which leads to mass abortions in the later stages of pregnancy and the birth of weak calves. This lowers the herd's reproductive efficiency and causes significant financial losses. Moreover, infected livestock may show a drop in milk yield by up to 50%, lethargy, fever, and jaundice. Some types of leptospira can affect the kidneys and liver of animals, causing permanent damage. So rats that spread leptospirosis pose a serious threat to both the health and productivity of farm animals. People, of course, suffer too because leptospirosis can be passed on to us as well. The rat carries the disease into the water, pets drink it, and then it's passed on to humans through them. But besides that, Australians also have to deal with the fact that rats are real troublemakers and scavengers, trying to gnaw through anything they come across. Rats are behind thousands of incidents of wiring damage in homes and commercial buildings across the country, causing major financial losses for owners. There have been cases where rodents chewing through plastic pipes and cables left buildings without water or electricity. But still, the worst thing that rats do in Australia is wipe out native species. These animals are omnivores, which means they won't back down from anyone they can overpower. You can clearly see this in the disaster on Penguin Island. It's a small but very famous island off Western Australia, about 45 minutes south of Perth, right in the middle of Shoalwater Island's marine park. There are plenty of seabirds living here, including pelicans. However, the main residents can be guessed from the island's name. Yes, that's right, penguins. More specifically, little penguins or Eudiptera minor, also called little blue penguins. According to data from 2007, there were between 1,600 and 2,000 little blue penguins on the island, the largest colony of this species in Western Australia, until rats were introduced. By 2022, their numbers had fallen to just 250 because of the rats. Black rats were first spotted on Penguin Island in 2012. It's believed they could have gotten to this isolated patch of land in a few ways, either on ships bringing building materials or tourists, or by swimming across the sandy spit that links the island to the mainland during low tide. Either way, their arrival marked the start of a serious ecological disaster that quickly got out of hand. In just 1 year, the rat population had exploded, reaching, by some estimates, several thousand individuals. Since rats are omnivores and penguins aren't really aggressive, the rats added the island's main residents to their menu. No, not the adult penguins. They're too big for rodents. The rats started feeding on the chicks and eggs, which is more than enough to turn into a disaster for the population. Rats not only killed penguins, but also contributed to a drop in their reproductive success. The rodent invasion happened at a time when scientists had already noticed a decline in breeding pairs. For instance, according to one report, the penguin population on the island had already shrunk by 2012, but the rat invasion made the problem worse, pushing the situation to a critical point. On top of that, having such a dangerous land predator nearby added extra stress to the colony, which could have affected egg incubation and chick rearing. The invasion of rats on Penguin Island in Western Australia has caused damage not only to the penguins, but also to a whole range of other local species, upsetting the fragile ecological balance. These rodents, with their incredible ability to survive and eat just about anything, have become a direct threat to many of the island's inhabitants who aren't used to such predators. One of the most vulnerable groups turned out to be the local skinks and other reptiles. These lizards evolved in complete isolation, where they had no natural ground predators. This meant they never developed behavioral or physical defenses against such a threat. For example, they mostly led a ground-dwelling life, often coming out into open areas to bask in the sun. Naturally, this made them easy prey. Of course, these reptiles did have a natural reaction to danger, quick escape and hiding, but it wasn't enough to stand up to such a nimble and aggressive predator as the black rat. The rats actively hunted the skinks, especially the young. The rodents were a new evolutionary unknown predator, and the lizards had no experience recognizing this threat. Moreover, the rats also competed with skinks for the food supply, since both species feed on insects, which further increased the pressure on the lizard population. As a result, the skink population sharply declined. Ecologists monitoring the area at the time noticed a significant drop in the number of animals they could observe. And of course, this became one of the key indicators confirming the serious damage the rats were causing to the island's ecosystem. Rats also posed a serious threat to other seabird species that use the island for nesting. While adult Australian pelicans were too big to be preyed on, their eggs and chicks were vulnerable. Rats would sneak into unattended nests and eat the eggs. Other birds, including silver gulls and various cormorant species, suffered similar damage. Attacks on their chicks directly affected breeding success and the survival of the colonies. So, as we've already mentioned, disaster struck the island. And it was really good that the decision to take action was made without delay. At the start of 2013, the Department of Parks and Wildlife of Western Australia launched a full-scale campaign to eradicate the rodents. This operation required careful planning and precise execution to avoid harming the island's other inhabitants. The main approach was using toxic bait made specifically to fight rodents. More than 270 bait points were installed in strategic locations across the island. The bait was housed in airtight containers that only rats could access, This is really crucial to avoid the risk of secondary poisoning for predatory birds such as owls or other animals. Alongside using poisonous bait, another key of the operation kicked off: constant monitoring. Experts regularly walked around the island, checking traps and motion sensor cameras to keep track of the rat population and see how well the campaign was working. Sanitary measures were also carried out. All potential rodent food sources like trash containers were either cleared away or sealed. Visitors to the island were required to take all their rubbish with them, depriving the rats of any food. This all-around approach, combining direct action with preventative measures, proved to be crucial. The results didn't take long to show. By the end of 2013, the number of rats had dropped significantly, giving hope that the operation would succeed. Over the next 3 years, scientists kept a close watch on the island, but didn't spot a single sign of rodents. Finally, in October 2016, the Western Australian government officially declared Penguin Island rat-free. This was an important victory in the fight against an invasive species and allowed local animal populations to start bouncing back. The operation carried out is an example of how quick and well-planned actions can save a fragile ecosystem from an inevitable threat. But you know how they're also fighting black rats in Australia? With rats. Yeah, Australians are pretty creative in their quest to get rid of invasive rodent pests. Australian bush rats, or Rattus fuscipes, have become a biological weapon against black rats. The bush rat looks pretty harmless at first glance. It's a small rodent about the size of a tennis ball with round ears, a short tail, and thick gray-brown fur. It leads a secretive, mostly nocturnal life, living in the forests and bushes of southeastern Australia. It's also worth noting that, unlike its invasive relatives, these animals don't like climbing trees and prefer to make shallow burrows or nests under rocks and fallen logs where they feel safe. Their diet is diverse. They're omnivorous, but mainly stick to plant foods such as mushrooms, seeds, fruits, and plant stems. They also consume various invertebrates. It's worth noting that bush rats play a useful ecological role. They help pollinate some plants, like Banksias, when they feed on their nectar. Overall, they're not just rodents, but an important part of the local ecosystem. The pollination mechanism is simple but effective. In search of nectar, shrub rats move around, brushing their snouts and bodies against the flower clusters. During this process, pollen sticks to their fur and then gets carried to other flowers, ensuring cross-pollination. This way of pollinating is especially important for Banksias, as rodents can carry pollen over long distances. This helps create genetic diversity in plants, making them more resistant to diseases and environmental changes. In some cases, it's been found that rodents can even be better pollinators than birds. For example, one study showed that rodents carry bigger loads of pollen than birds, suggesting they have a high potential for successful pollination. And this super useful rat has almost completely disappeared from the North Head Reserve in Sydney because of urbanization and habitat fragmentation. And, of course, because of predation by introduced foxes and feral cats. The reserve, left without its natural inhabitant, was quickly taken over by invasive black rats, which started causing serious damage to local species by eating eggs and chicks. To restore the balance, in 2014, the conservation group Australian Wildlife Conservancy, together with other organizations, kicked off a project to reintroduce bush rats into the reserve. Ecologists trapped over 170 healthy bush rats from other distant areas to ensure genetic diversity for the new population. Before being released, each rat had a microchip implanted for future monitoring. Then the rodents were set free across 618 acres of the reserve. It's worth noting that this move was part of a broader ecosystem restoration program, which also involved controlling wild cats and foxes, making the reserve a safe place for local wildlife. The project's results exceeded all expectations. The number of black rats in the reserve dropped sharply, while in 2019 their population was estimated at around 112. By 2020, that number had fallen to 29. And in May 2021, during monitoring, only 9 black rats were caught, showing that they were steadily being pushed out. This became possible thanks to the territorial nature of the bush rats, who actively competed with the invasive species for food and shelter. As the local rodent population grew and strengthened, they effectively drove off the black rats and kept them away, using their natural defense and aggressive behaviors. So what's the bottom line? The project showed that reintroducing a local species can be an effective and eco-friendly way to control invasive pests, helping to restore an ecosystem disrupted by humans. At least in this case, everything worked out, which is incredibly useful experience for Australians, since they constantly need to come up with new ways to deal with invasive species. Australian water rats, affectionately called Rakali by locals, have turned out to be yet another effective ally in the fight against invasive black rats. This unusual showdown was documented by scientists from the University of Sydney, who captured the first ever video evidence of Rakali attacking their invasive cousins. Rakali are semi-aquatic rodents that live in Australia's freshwater habitats. Unlike black rats, Rakali are bigger and much stronger. They can grow up to 15 inches long and weigh over 2.2 pounds. Representatives of this rat species are skilled predators that feed on aquatic insects, fish, frogs, crayfish, and even small ducks. Their powerful jaws and sharp teeth are perfect for this kind of diet, and it's these physical advantages that let Rakali dominate black rats. Footage from a camera trap near Sydney captured Rakali attacking black rats, drawing them toward the water and then killing them. Scientists believe Rakali may view the invasive species as food competitors or even as potential prey. This discovery is very encouraging as it shows that local predators could be crucial in keeping invasive populations in check. This kind of behavior is especially important for protecting coastal ecosystems where Rakali live. They can form a natural barrier that stops black rats from taking over new areas and harming local wildlife. In this way, Rakali are a living example of how bringing back native species populations can be a powerful tool against invasive pests, helping to restore nature's balance. Someone seems to be missing from our video, don't you think? For example, owls, which Australians also use as a kind of biological weapon against rats. Using owls as a natural way to fight rats in Australia is an eco-friendly and potentially really effective approach, which is increasingly being seen as an alternative to poisons. The main species considered for this role are the common barn owl and the boobook owl. These hunters are perfect for keeping rat and mouse populations under control. Owls are incredibly efficient hunters. One family of common barn owls, for example, can eat up to 10,000 rodents a year, making them priceless allies for farmers. These birds, silently gliding through the sky, can spot prey even in total darkness thanks to their sharp hearing and excellent night vision. They act as natural population controllers, constantly keeping rodent numbers low. Encouraging them to breed by setting up special nesting sites on farms and barns and gardens is a simple and fairly cheap strategy that brings long-term ecological and economic benefits. Many farmers, ditching chemicals in favor of owls, report a noticeable drop in pest damage. This tactic works especially well in areas where owl populations haven't been hit too hard by humans yet, but this promising method runs into serious problems. The thing is, there's secondary poisoning from rodenticides. A lot of Australian farms use second-generation poisons, which build up in rodents' bodies. Rats don't die right away, and their weakened state makes them easy prey for owls. When an owl eats a poisoned rat, the toxin gets into its body, causing internal bleeding and a slow, painful death. Research has shown that over 70% of common barn owls and other owls found dead carry traces of these poisons in their bodies. Even non-lethal doses can weaken a bird, slow its reaction time, and make it more vulnerable to other predators or accidents. This creates a vicious cycle. The more poison is used, the fewer owls remain, which in turn leads to even bigger rat populations. Second-generation poisons that raise the most concern include bromadiolone, brodifacoum, difenicum, and flucumaphin. These substances are anticoagulants, which means they stop blood from clotting. Their effect is so strong that even a small amount of poison stored in a rat's tissues is enough to poison a predator. This problem affects not just owls, but other predators that eat rodents as well, including foxes, dingoes, snakes, and native birds of prey. That's why scientists are rightly calling for a complete ban on the use of these rodenticides in residential areas and agriculture where wildlife could be at risk. In response to this problem, several projects have been launched in Australia aimed at protecting owls and promoting safer ways to control rodents. For example, the Threatened Species Conservancy works with farmers to create perfect conditions for owls on their land, putting up nest boxes and spreading information about the dangers of poisons. The projects also include training farmers on how to use traps and other non-chemical methods correctly. Some regions and states are already looking at legislation to limit the sale and use of second-generation poisons. A successful shift to greener methods needs both government backing and a conscious approach from the public. In the end, the health of Australia's ecosystem depends on working together to protect its most valuable predators. Of course, there are also ways to keep rats at bay that are more high-tech. For example, ultrasonic repellents are one of the popular, yet at the same time controversial technologies used in the ongoing war against rats. These devices work by emitting high-frequency sound waves that are supposed to make rodents uncomfortable, messing with their hearing and leaving them disoriented. The sound is so high-pitched that people and most pets can't hear it, which makes this method appealing in terms of being humane and safe. However, even though the idea sounds promising, its long-term effectiveness is debated in the scientific community. Critics of ultrasonic repellents point out several major issues. First of all, high-frequency sound waves get blocked really easily. They can't pass through walls, furniture, or other obstacles, which means the device can only protect a very limited area. And even within one room, there might be dead spots. Second, as some studies show, rats and other rodents can quickly get used to constant noise. After a while, the animals will probably adapt to the sound and stop avoiding it, which basically nullifies the whole deterrent effect. In the end, the device might stop working as a repellent and just become a regular, useless gadget. Overall, although ultrasonic repellents offer a humane and easy-to-use alternative to poisons and traps, their effectiveness is often questioned. Pest control experts suggest seeing them more as a supplement to a comprehensive rodent control strategy rather than a standalone solution. So the best way to get rid of rats is the native species of Australia, meaning the country should do everything to make sure these animals are well taken care of. Only then can they become the perfect weapon against these long-tailed, sharp-toothed invaders.